I'm Erica Wagner. I'm the literary editor of The Times. And I'm here to introduce the wonderful William Boyd. William Boyd is a man of many parts. The last time he and I met was in advance of the release of Restless, the brilliant television adaptation of his 2006 novel of the same name, starring Rufus Sewell and Michelle Dockery. He was putting the finishing touches on Longing, a play he'd cleverly fashioned from two short stories by Anton Chekhov, My Life and A Visit to Friends, which opened in the spring at Hampstead Theatre to glowing reviews. Not long before that, he and I had had a chat about Waiting for Sunrise, his most recent novel, which begins in Vienna before the First World War and makes a heady brew of passion, psychoanalysis, and the risk and treachery involved in both art and war. And now, as you'll all surely know, we're awaiting the publication of his latest work, featuring none other than James Bond, and due to be released in September. Well, more than that, he's adapted Evelyn Waugh for the telly. He's won all sorts of awards, including the Costa, admittedly when it was called the Whitbread back in the day, the James Tate Black Memorial Prize. He's been shortlisted for the Booker. He fooled the worlds of art and literature with his brilliant hoax, Nat Tate, 1928-1960, published in 1998 at the height of what Boyd has called the young British artist delirium. It fooled the world and recently had a marvelous postscript when one of Nat Tate's paintings sold for over £7,000 at Sotheby's, the money going to the Artists' General Benevolent Institution, founded in 1814 by Turner. In short, he's a matchless inventor, storyteller, creator, ventriloquist, a literary force to be reckoned with, no matter what he chooses to take on. Please welcome William Boyd. So maybe let's go right into Bond and tell us a little bit about the genesis of this great project.
Well, it's not something you can audition for. You can't say, I feel like writing a James Bond novel. You have to be asked. And I was asked in the end of, let me think where we are now, end of 2011. I was approached by the Ian Fleming estate and asked if I would consider writing a new continuation novel, as they're called. And I said yes instantly. What a treat. And I said yes for other reasons as well, in that I had written two spy novels myself, or types of spy novel. So I was very familiar with the genre. And I also knew a lot about Ian Fleming, who's a man who's always fascinated me. And I've written about Fleming in journalism. In fact, I think I wrote a piece for you, Erica, about Fleming. And I even put him in one of my novels. I put him in a novel of mine called Any Human Heart, where Ian Fleming, in World War II, recruits the hero, Logan Mount Stewart, to the Naval Intelligence Division where Fleming worked. And then when Any Human Heart was turned into a Channel 4 series, an actor played Fleming. So there was a sense in which I was familiar with Bond and familiar with Fleming. And the other funny thing, which I should mention, is that by sheer coincidence, three of the actors who've played James Bond have been in films that I've written. And I've even I directed Daniel Craig in a film I wrote. So there's this curious Bond-Fleming theme in my life. And to get the invitation finally seemed, in a way, some kind of perfect vindication, or somebody upstairs knew something, and so I said yes, and then the process began. But that's how it occurred. I reread every Bond novel and Bond short story in chronological order before I started writing my own. And Fleming gives you a massive amount of information about Bond. His inner life, his backstory, his education, his likes, his dislikes, his phobias, his passions. So as a character in a novel, there's this incredible richness. Whereas in a film, because film is photography, it's very hard to be subjective. So you see Bond and you see what he gets up to, but I feel you just don't know him at all. And the literary Bond is a far more complex and nuanced creature than even a brilliant actor like Daniel Craig can portray. Bond is not just a superhero. He has flaws, he has weaknesses, he makes mistakes, and yet he's incredibly tough. There's something very well-rounded about him. And I think that was Fleming's genius in a way. That it wasn't the fact that he managed to think of, you know, a dozen or so fascinating stories. It's that he created a character like Sherlock Holmes or Alice in Wonderland that endures and appeals to everybody. So it's that's the measure of his achievement, and that in a way was what stimulated me. Was like, let's take this character and send him off somewhere and see what he's like as a human being. I remember saying to when I had the interview for the job, as it were, I said, I'm interested in the man, the human being. And that's what I've tried to do in writing the book. And that's why I went back and reread everything. Because I'd read the books as a teenager. London was also, in a way, at the height of its swinging London coolness. We think of the 60s in London, but actually swinging London really didn't begin until 65 or 66. So it's to think of Bond in London in 69 is very intriguing, and you know, I can remember it vividly. So that was another reason.
And yet in 1969, but as dare I say, as a 45-year-old myself, as a middle-aged man, which makes me think of the sort of Don Draper in the late 60s in Mad Men, you know, who's looking at what's going on among the younger people with some puzzlement.
It is interesting because Bond, you know, is born in 1924, so he's a young man in World War II, and you forget that in the late 60s, if you were a veteran of World War II, you were in your 40s. So it just changes the whole angle on that period. A lot of people were still alive who'd fought in World War I. It seems like ancient history now, but and the 60s are sort of still fresh to us to a degree, but actually it was a different world, you know. And the wonderful thing is no mobile phones, no internet, no GPS tracking devices. None of the gadgets that feature in spy novels or contemporary Bond films. It's real old-fashioned spying. The Cold War is at its height, and in a way, the great spy novels are, I think, sort of ruined by technology. Once the 80s, once the Berlin Wall came down, I think that was the end of the classic era of spy writing. So, you know, you have the British Secret Service was founded in 1909. The wall came down in 89, didn't it? So we've got 80 years to exploit and to play with before all this surveillance technology comes in and sort of, it doesn't ruin it, but it just changes it. I mean,
makes it harder to tell a story.
Yeah, it does. You've really got to think. You know, he'd have a mobile phone, or they know exactly. I mean, it's happened to me when I wrote my novel Ordinary Thunderstorms, which is set in today. And this is a man who goes underground. How do you disappear in the early 21st century? It's incredibly difficult. So you're racking your brains to get around all this high tech and CCTV and so on and so forth. And going back to 69, it's blissful. you know, there's not even security checks at the airport. No. You can smoke everywhere. So it was fun to time travel, you know. Yes, I'm highly conscious of a slight air of anticlimax in this, but you know, a book has to have a title, and for me, titles are fantastically important, and I spend a lot of time thinking about my titles. Sometimes they come almost before I start writing, and other moments I'm about to hand in the book to the publisher, and I still haven't thought of the bloody title. So they really are important, and they have to have for me, a ring, and they have to be apt. And so I finally came up with the title. Obviously, it wasn't just me. I had to run it by everybody else. But the title that I've chosen for my James Bond novel, which everybody likes enormously, I should say, to get rid of the faint feeling of anticlimax, maybe, is Solo. S-O-L-O. And I can say it's called Solo for a very good reason, because Bond goes solo in my novel and takes off on his own private mission, hence its absolute aptness. But it's a great, chunky, one-word hit, I think.
It's got those two O's.
Two O's that may
good.
give you a little ghost of 007 as well, and leave that to the designer of the cover. But yes, exactly, and it's everybody knows instantly what it means, and with a bit of luck, people will be curious to find out what happens when Bond does go solo. Oh yeah, I'm allowed to give you not countries, continents. We're drip feeding this information. It's the 3 continents he visits in the course of the novel are Europe, obviously, Africa, surprise, surprise, and the USA. So that's where his journeys take him. And I've written a little sort of couple of paragraphs explaining why the title is Solo. And again, I can say it's what happens to him in Africa that takes him off to the USA. So there are consequences. Not really. I mean, I know Isherwood's work very well, but because my novel's set in World War I, and well, before World War I, it starts in 1913. And the Isherwood world is the late 1920s and the early 30s, the rise of Nazism. So there isn't much of an overlap, except, Vienna and Berlin. They speak German there. No, I wasn't thinking so much of that. If I was thinking of anything as a kind of echo, it would be more to do with writers like John Buchan or Somerset Maugham. That sort of it's that sort of adventure, in the sense that if that's a genre you'd want to put in of an Englishman abroad who gets into terrible difficulties and has to extract himself with as much guile and ingenuity as possible. So if there was any echo that I was exploiting, it was that, not the Berlin 20s world.
It was the sort of like the sex and there was a particular
sex, yes,
bit in it that was
well,
kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, but my feeling is that sex hasn't changed, no. And that. Men and women and men's needs and desires, haven't changed in centuries. So I think that I feel very strongly that actually, if you're setting a novel, at the beginning of the 20th century, the intimate nature of the characters' lives is actually incredibly close to the intimate, subjective lives we lead today, but often seems to people to be an anachronism. But I can quote chapter and verse. If you ever read the letters of James Joyce to his wife Nora, they're sort of eye-wateringly candid, written in the the first decade of the 20th century. They could have been written yesterday. So there's a sense in which human beings, in the privacy of their own bedroom, carry on very much as they always have. So you're absolutely right in the sense that the slightly racy 1920s.
Sort of seedy.
Well, yes, I mean, it's...
You see that too at the Pompeii and Herculaneum.
Yeah, of course. I think it's
so
absolutely, it's we haven't changed that much. When we switch the lights out,
exactly.
We revert. So it's so I think there's a sense in which that, but more particularly, I think in the case of Vienna, before the First World War, it was the place to be. In every sense of the word, it was perhaps the most modern and exciting city on the planet, particularly intellectually and culturally and socially. Though, mind you, having written a play set in late 19th century Russia, Anton Chekhov had quite a life as well. So there's a sense in which the artistic circles have always been licentious to a degree, or haven't followed the customs of the bourgeoisie at the same time. So Lysander Reef is an actor, and he's mixing with artists. If you just read what actors and artists got up to in 1913, it's highly familiar. My next novel, my own next novel, is going to be unlike anything I've written before. So I'm have to keep myself interested, and I feel that I have written my spy novels and my thrillers, and I really enjoyed doing them. But my plans for my next novels are completely different. So I'm not ticking the boxes. And again, because I don't like fantasy, I would never write a horror novel, and I could write a realistic horror novel. And science fiction, again, is something I enjoy, but I would never take it on. So no, I think those exercises, if you like, of exercising those muscles in those 3 novels represent my visits to the genre.